Welcome to the Neijiaquan podcast. My name is Isaac Kamens. This is a bi-weekly podcast where my friend Jess O'Brien and I discuss internal martial arts, qigong, and meditation. This week we discuss the Shingi master Li Jianqiu. First we discuss a famous incident that Li was involved in with Han Mu Xian and a couple other real famous Shingi guys, where Han takes on a Russian strongman. It's one of the more sort of iconic stories about Xingyi. Then we take a look at Li Jianqiu's book from the 1920s, his book on Xingyi, which discusses the 5 elements in the linking form. We talk a little bit about his training method, but mostly we discuss how he was involved in these martial arts associations at the time that were geared towards promoting martial arts, publishing books, that sort of thing. Then we discuss different forms of dissolving in Neigong, which include internal dissolving, external dissolving, dissolving outside of yourself, and a few other things that we didn't catch in the first season when we talked about dissolving. Enjoy the episode. Thanks for listening, and take care.
Welcome to the Neijiaquan podcast with Isaac and Jess. Today we're going to talk about the Xingyi master Li Jianqiu. Li Jianqiu is another of these older generation masters who were born in the 1800s and learned around the turn of the century. So they're part of this flowering of internal martial arts. And they're also the teachers of Liu Hung Chieh, the teacher that we spoke a lot about in the first season, obviously. Li Jianqiu, let's see, his birth and death dates. He's born in 1881, and he lives quite a long life until 1956. So he experiences, everything from the Qing dynasty, the fall of the dynasty, the New Republic, and then the People's Republic. So he lives through, that's actually quite a stretch there. So into 70s.
Yeah.
The first thing we want to talk about Master Li Jianqiu, is that he comes from an interesting lineage, and he's part of this stream of Xingyi teachers that are some of the most famous. So we first ran across his name in an old article, probably around 1986, right, Isaac?
I believe that's correct, yeah. Fighting Arts International.
So this old article identifies Master Li Jianqiu's father as the teacher of Liu Hung Chieh. So I'm getting the impression that those guys were both teachers to Master Liu, because he's about 20 years older. And then the father's even older yet, so he's hanging out with these guys and learning Shingi from them. I suspect both of them to some degree.
Probably
mostly from the son.
Right, probably the father was around, but the son was doing most of the teaching.
Right, and they come from the lineage of yet another guy, Li Jianqiu, who's very famous in the martial arts world. But we're not going to go too deep into him today. But that's another name that bears a lot of investigation. A great Shingi master. But today we're going to continue talking about Li Jianqiu. So one of the first things I wanted to touch on here, he's part of a famous event where martial artists were engaging in challenge matches in China back in the old days. So we dug up an article here. It says, in September 1918, Li Jianqiu, together with Zhang Xiaodong, went to Beijing with their disciples to take part in the 10,000 countries martial arts great competition, where Han Mu Xian defeated the famous Russian strongman Kang Tier. So this is a famous martial arts story that's over 100 years old now, and it's where the Bagwan Xingyi groups got together to go up against a foreign fighter, probably more than one, and they sought out competition against these challenge matches that were going on around China at that time. So I think this is part of why Xingyi and Bagua become famous around that time period, I'm suspecting.
Yeah, I think this was part of that movement to sort of promote martial arts. That started. We talked about a little bit about these martial art associations that started in the 1920s or so, 10s, 20s, and their purpose was to promote martial arts both as a way of sort of national pride, but also sort of health and physical education. And so these tours that they would do often included demonstrations and tournaments and challenge matches and things. And so this was, I think, probably the most famous incident because of this big Russian guy. And
So in 1918, this Russian group is going around China putting on these exhibition matches where they'll fight local fighters, and I think this is probably a common thing around that time period where, fighters would go around, people would gather around, bet on the fights. This type of thing happens all over the world.
Still does, yep.
Exactly. And so what we found out is that Master Li Jianqiu, we ran across an article that said he was part of this traveling party of internal martial artists that went to challenge the Russian strongman. So where did we dig that up? From the Shingi boxing manual.
Right, and
that we talked about last time.
He also studied Bagua with Zhang Jiaodong, so there was possibly, this could have been, where they where he met him or something, but he had that connection where it was his Xingyi teacher and his Bagua teacher kind of putting on this event.
Right, so he was learning from both guys that went to this challenge match and brought their top disciples with them. So here in the Xingyi boxing manual by Jin Yunting, in the back, into the biography section, it talks about how Li Jianqiu accepted the invitation in September 1918. He and Zhang Jiaodong led more than 10 of his students, including Li Jianqiu and Han Mu Xian, to attend the World Martial Arts competition in Beijing, where they defeated the arrogant Russian strongman Kang Tier. So there's always he's always portrayed as like arrogant or, a belligerent and a braggart who was cutting a swath through the Chinese martial artists at the time.
Right. Well, that's sort of the Pulp Fiction version of it, or the Hollywood version. But then there's the more sort of subdued version. I think in the Bagua Journal they talk about it, where there was a bit more respect. I think.
Yeah.
After the fight wasn't quite so dismissive of the whole thing. But.
Right. So returning to the story of Li Jianqiu, he joins in with his two teachers, his Bagua and Xingyi masters, and goes on this trip to Beijing to get into this fight. And so I don't know if Li Jianqiu actually gets into any of the real fighting, though. Unfortunately, his name doesn't come up in the actual action.
I mean, yeah, we don't know. But I would assume if he was on the trip, he was doing something.
So maybe he fought. I mean, I'd like to think he fought in an exhibition match.
Maybe he fought. Maybe he did a demonstration.
Maybe he did a forms demo. Yeah.
Who knows? I mean, it's.
But for the story, it would be cool if he did have a little part in the fight.
Great, but
a lot of that stuff doesn't get recorded in the annals of time, and especially hasn't been translated. There could be a lot more about him that we don't know. That would be cool to find out. So just to finish the story of the strongman, Li Jianqiu's friend and classmate Han Mu Xian is the one who fights him. So we pulled from an article. This is from Bagua Journal, I believe. In 1918, a Russian strongman named Kang Tier was traveling around the mainland, setting up platform boxing matches and challenging Chinese boxers. Previous to his arrival in Beijing, the Russian was undefeated at platform boxing. He arrived in Beijing around the beginning of September and was beating the Chinese badly in every boxing match he set up. It was as if there was no good fighters in China at all. This was a great loss of face for the Chinese, and many Chinese were angry with the Russians. So that's at the point where Zhang Jiaodong and Li Jianqiu get together. They're already in their 60s, but they were angry with what this Russian was doing. So they got together and took their best students, including Li Jianqiu. And they went to Beijing to fight. They arrived in Beijing on September 12, 1918, and issued a challenge to the Russian. Evidently, the Russian had only been fighting mediocre boxers, and the Russians knew it. The fights had been fixed. When they heard that these boxers had come from Tianjin to challenge them, the Russians put a lot of pressure on the chief of police to keep them away. So it sounds like this was something of a setup. Like these matches were actually more like wrestling, like pro wrestling, where
right.
It was sort of a outcome was,
or they just were selective about who they picked.
So they were picking tomato cans that he could knock out.
Yeah.
So the second thing we wanted to talk about Li Jianqiu is his experience as a founding member of some of these early martial arts societies that we've been running across. So from Li's book, we have his own foreword here. He writes a little bit about Xingyi and his experience. But the one thing I wanted to pull out here is that in 1912, he lists a number of guys who formed together, including famous teachers like Li Jianqiu, Zhang Xiaodong, Han Mu Xian, who we talked about.
Right, the same guys we just
The exact guys who were at the
yeah.
fight.
Yeah.
And a couple other guys launched the Warriors Association in Tianjin. So this is 1912, right at the end of the Qing Dynasty. So that takes place in Tianjin. And then the Esteeming the Martial Society in Beijing. So in that same year, these two premier martial arts organizations are formed. And I think a lot of the books we've been running across, like you were commenting on that, they seem to be from the same group.
Yeah, it's like a network of martial arts associations or something that are all working to promote stuff. So they were publishing books, they were putting on events, they were promoting teachers.
And they were going to challenge matches.
Beating up on Russians.
Right. So the match against the Russian is 8 years after the forming of the Esteeming the Martial Society in Beijing. And so this book by Li Jianqiu is 1920. Looks like it's published.
Right, and I think by that time these it had expanded beyond those original two. So they had chapters in Shanghai and other places too.
So the groups are starting to spread. It sounds like the fight against the Russian strongman might have been a big promotion, because in 1918 that happens. Then the book comes out 2 years later.
Right.
Yeah, maybe they built up some more, name.
And I think
Shingi
they were, I think they also were probably published Sun Ludong's book, because he mentions it in the.
Right, he calls out Sun Ludong's book in here, and then there's the one by Jin Yunting we talked about last time. There's a wave of these books published.
Right.
And it makes sense that it seems like it's the same sort of network of folks that are doing it. From here, we're going to look more at the Xingyi manual of Li Jianqiu, published in 1920. So Master Li, he's one of the teachers of Liu Hung Chieh. He brought out this fairly seminal text. It's one of the best Xingyi books I've read from the old days. So there's a lot of stuff in here. There's history, there's prefaces and forewords from other important people. And there's a lot of theory, and there's also step-by-step instruction on techniques. But I wanted to start at the very beginning here. Okay, so it says, the Xingyi boxing art comes from the Zen master Damo of the Northern Wei dynasty, roughly, the year 300 to 500 area.
Wow.
So they're crediting Xingyi as being created by this famous Buddhist, leader who helped originate Buddhism in China itself in the year 300 and something. How could a martial art be that old? That's
all
insane.
The way back.
I mean, is it really from him, or what are they trying to say here?
Maybe influenced by his teachings. I don't know.
But also the antiquity is important,
right? I think that's the thing about things being tested and old and been ancient, right? That gives it some credibility. That if you say, I'm connected to this. That's why people, do their lineage, because it's like if you say I'm connected to something that's been around for 1,000 years, it gives it some credibility.
Next, he mentions that the teachings were obtained by Yue Fei of the Song dynasty around the 900 to 1200 area.
Right, and that's sort of when the modern Shingi, quote unquote, begins. This
concept of, it says here, they merged the spear and boxing techniques, establishing a method of teaching his officers called Xingyi, shape and intent.
Yeah. I mean, and who knows if that had any actual relation to what modern, what Xingyi Quan does. But I think that was the kind of origins of, merging those two arts to create one, thing. And probably sort of like the way Tai Chi, didn't have the name Tai Chi until it became popular, and then everybody started calling their thing Tai Chi. Right,
it may not have been called this exact thing at the time.
I think originally it was something called 5 element fist or something, like it had a different name.
Another idea is the Wei Jia Sanshou that you trained back in the day.
Right.
We talked about last season.
Well, that's the family art, supposedly,
of General Liu Fei.
Of his so that would have been the thing that he learned as a child or whatever. Right. And then Xingyi Quan was the thing that he developed for his officers based on his family art.
Right, and the combination of that with the spear technique for the military. So again, it's like, I don't think that's necessarily historically true. I think people have debunked the historical, actual linear connection. But again, there's something about it on a mythological level or whatever, something about Yue Fei's approach to combat relates to the way Xingyi's practice.
It's probably a conglomeration of multiple people, right? So the same way they
guy. It's a time period,
right? So the same way Lao Tzu was probably a bunch of people,
or at least a bunch of people contributed to it. Exactly.
That this is a bunch of people sort of to make a single story. Right.
This happened. Something happened during Yue Fei's army philosophy approach to fighting that relates to the way we do Xingyi on some level. It's hard to say how much,
I think that was
there's something there.
I think that was the merging of hand-to-hand combat with spear combat. I mean,
who knows? Well, yeah, because the officers, maybe they needed a hand-to-hand system for disciplining the troops, and you can't necessarily use the spear.
Again, I have there's no way to verify.
There's a lot of ways you could.
But the story, the story that Bruce gives is that it was so he developed eagle claw for Yue Fei. He developed eagle claw for the enlisted men and Shingi for the officers, and that in order to become an officer, you had to beat your superior.
Take their place.
Right, so that's how so you had to use the inferior art to beat someone who had the superior art, and then you were able to go to that next level.
Then you use that to hold your own position,
which in theory keeps the level of the officers at the highest level possible, because if you lose your if you lose your spunk, then the next guy coming up will take you out.
Moving forward onto the Neigong principles, today we wanted to talk a little bit about the other aspects of dissolving. So there's outer dissolving is what we talked about all last season in the Opening the Energy Gates book. But as you move on, there's more to it. So what other types of dissolving are included in the system, Isaac?
Initially, you dissolve your physical body and you go down, right?
So that's what we call...
That's the beginning practice of energy gates.
Right. That's outer dissolving. You dissolve away from yourself, like
down and out.
Down and out, sort of drifting away from you so the chi breaks up, kind of.
Yeah. And then there's things where you go deeper into the body, beyond just the surface, but you're still basically going down and out. Where you're just,
and that all falls under outer dissolving, the top.
Exactly. And then the direction can change, and you can dissolve. Instead of just going down and out, you can go up and out, or forward and out, or back and out. Right? The direction can shift. That's sort of a...
So typically, once you've done a lot of downward dissolving, now you just do the opposite and do upward dissolving to finish out that type of training.
There's a few steps in between because you want to make sure that the channels are clear before you start going up. Upward dissolving is different from, bringing your energy up your body. Right? Those are slightly different things.
Different.
The upward dissolving is clearing the path for bringing energy up your body.
So those are two distinct steps.
Right.
In this case, we're just discussing dissolving. So you're doing that downward dissolving, you're doing upward dissolving, but it still doesn't mention anything about actual using your mind to move the energy through those channels.
Right. So you can dissolve upward, but be dropping your energy. Right. And that's the kind of the intermediate phase between energy gates and spiraling energy body, is that you can do that thing of you're essentially dropping down internally, but you can make the dissolving go any direction you want, but really up and down are
to fully attain energy gates. You can dissolve down, up, out, left, right, whatever.
Yeah, for example, one of the things that a lot of people get confused about is, well, what do you do when you're laying down? Because head
dissolve like this or like this,
right? Because is it head to foot or is it heaven to earth, right?
Right.
And that kind of thing. So technically, when you're laying down and you're going top to bottom, you're going from front to back.
So you're starting with like your nipples and your chest down to your shoulder blades,
which is it would be all, but it would also at the same time be your kneecaps to and so
and the tips of your toes,
right?
And the tip
so
of your nose.
The surface area is kind of flattened
like
out,
a sheet laying across the top of your body.
So those kinds of things, and there isn't. I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do it, but you just kind of get that like they are different,
right?
And that once your mind can kind of do that without getting, worked up.
So typically, once you've done a bunch of standing dissolving, then you move on to spiraling energy body, where you begin to dissolve upward as one of the first steps.
That's the first practice.
The very first step, which is technically not necessarily spiraling anything at all. It's just dissolving upward is the first skill you learn within the set.
It's clearing the path, right?
Mm-hmm. So you finish the job of
once you've dissolved upward, then you can, quote unquote, bring your energy up your body to do X, Y, and Z.
Well, it just reminds me of how in opening the energy gates, the actual act of dissolving downward causes an energetic effect. Similarly, once you dissolve upwards, your body itself just starts to pull the energy up a little bit on its own, even without your mind helping, kind of. The dissolving sort of draws it like a...
Well, that's where I think
fishing lure, it comes after it.
The energy's there already, right?
Yeah.
And it's really just a more accurate way of saying it is all of this is you're not creating anything. You're just feeling what's there.
Right.
And you're tapping into it, and you're maybe... emphasizing something or focusing on something, but you're not making energy go up your body.
Right.
Energy's moving up through your body constantly. All you're doing with this is sort of refining how it moves through your body, and then kind of
unkinking it a little bit so it flows on its own.
Later, then you kind of learn how to tweak it,
right,
and use it along with your physical body. But it's still the energy's there. It's just a question of, your ability to feel it.
What's your experience of it, kind of?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of
and
like...
you can involve your mind to make it feel stronger
it's like
than it is if you want.
Yeah, it's a muscle, right? I mean, just like a physical muscle, you have to, work it in order for it to get better, right? So, like, the muscle that you use to feel your body and relax is... it takes...
Apply it to this instead.
It just takes practice, right? I mean,
or you could apply it to opening and closing, or you could apply it to moving energy, or you could apply it to bending and stretching the spine. Those are all just ways to use the attention.
Yeah, those are other Neigongs, right?
So another one of the Neigongs that goes with this dissolving process is what he calls external dissolving, where you do outer dissolving, but somehow away from yourself, bit by bit, further and further away.
So if you go back to the outer dissolving, the first thing you do, right, is you start at the top of your head and you move down. So or above your head and you
slightly above, yeah,
and you move down. So that's kind of getting a little bit of that etheric field to move downward, right? The spiraling energy body thing is that you now begin to this is after you've cleared everything out. I want to emphasize that you don't start by doing this, but when things start to come up, you've dissolved ahead of it, and so the energy kind of will just follow it because the space is clear now, right? So it's like it's the best analogy is plumbing, right? That if you make water go down one pipe that's connected to another pipe, it'll go up the other pipe, right?
Right, with enough pressure, it'll rise up the other side.
And that's basically what you're doing, is that the downward pressure of the dissolving eventually just causes enough energy to make it rise back up.
To naturally rise up.
And so the work that you have to do so that rising energy doesn't fuck you up is really what we're talking about, because that's the upward dissolving. It's the thing that keeps that rising energy from overloading your system. Once you can do that, then that can just continue and go beyond your skin out to that space around you, and you do things like dissolve other people's fields. Right?
So basically anything from your Wei Qi out to the universe around you, that's the topic of external dissolving, including the people and the...
Qigong pretty much stops with what you do with your body and your Qi and a little bit of your emotions. It doesn't go into the psychic realm and all of that stuff. It has like a passive effect on it.
Sure, everything affects everything.
But the work that you're doing in energy gates and spiraling energy body, all that stuff is really focused on just those first 2.5 bodies. The physical body, the energy
body.
that keeps the physical body healthy, and a little bit of how the physical body and its energy affects your emotions.
Right, how they're tied together.
Because, it's the thing of if your body hurts, you generally aren't in a good mood.
No.
Right? So, somebody keeps poking you.
Well, if your body's all juiced up and feels great, your emotions go up too. And you feel
they have a better chance of being, positive, right? So that's kind of the passive effect. But
so the most obvious way to use external dissolving would be to dissolve your own connections to other people and to the other, I guess, realms of the universe, like starting with 1 foot away from yourself and going from there. Like, where would that kind of training begin?
The best explanation of it I got came from a New Yorker who described it as his experience of it sitting on a subway, which is first, when you learn dissolving, you're just able to dissolve your own body when you're sitting there on the subway, so everybody else's shit doesn't affect
Stick to you.
Right? You sit there long enough, you get comfortable enough in your own body, i.e. you can dissolve, then you start to being able to feel the guy next to you. And, and he's all, blah, blah, and you can dissolve enough that your energy
influence
kind of will influence the people very close to you, right? That's that first layer of sort of influence, which is,
foot or two on each side.
And before people start thinking we're talking about something really esoteric, this is just the difference between if somebody's across the room you yelling at you and they're right in your face.
Right.
When someone gets in your face, you feel it on a visceral level.
You feel that energy, man.
And so that's all, that's all this stuff I was talking about. They give it fancy names like etheric field, but it's really just, talking about the distance between you and the other person or other thing. So this first energy body that we're talking about that ends a couple inches from your skin. The second one, which is the one you're talking about with going outside yourself, ends maybe 3 feet from you. Maybe a little more if you're,
depending on how exuberant your own
but it doesn't go for miles and miles and miles, right? Somebody can just walk away from you and that your energy won't have that much effect on them.
Right. The further they get, it just boom.
Yeah, gone. So that's what the training in this is, and it has a lot of applicable things with body work and with martial arts, and with therapy or anything where you're going to be interacting with another person, because you can learn how to mitigate or stop their energy from affecting yours.
Right.
And that's kind of a useful skill.
And the final thing would be inner dissolving. That's outside the realm of either spiraling or
inner dissolving. If you go back to the 8 bodies, right? Once you get to the third body, which is the emotions, it's more efficient to use a slightly different method of dissolving, right? It's not better, it's just slightly more efficient. So you could do it with the outer dissolving, it just would take longer and wouldn't kind of go in as deep. So what it is instead of dissolving away from you out into the ether and having the energy around you clear things out and then bring that back into you, you're going inside yourself to the point inside of you that connects to everything else, and you're linking to that. So the idea is that there is as much space inside of my body as there is in the entire universe, right? I can go into myself as far as I can go out into the universe. And this is where you now are moving into what our school refers to as meditation, right? So the line between Neigong and Neidan, as internal alchemy, is you sort of leave the physical stuff in the physical realm, and now you move into the energetic, the mental, the psychic, blah, blah, all the other 8 bodies. And so that's kind of taking it to this more spiritual realm of things, as opposed to just get your physical body and your energy healthy. Yeah. So that's that part of it, which we haven't talked as much about. But when we talk about Liu Hung Chieh's meditation, the main technique of his meditation is that quote unquote inner dissolving.
We'll talk about that in the future.
All right, man. Nice to be here in person again.
Good to see you.
All right.
Hey, folks. Isaac here again. Thanks for listening. Check out our Instagram for images relating to the episodes. Check out the Patreon for lessons, interviews, discussions on things that we didn't get to in the podcast, and a whole bunch more. There's a link to it in the description. Again, thanks for listening, and take care.